They walked into the meeting expecting a negotiation. They didn't recognize me until I took off my sunglasses and slid the deed to their house across the table. I'm Maya, and 10 years ago, when I was just 16, my parents took me on a family vacation to Greece and never came back. No warning, no apology, just a note in my jacket that said, "You're old enough to survive." I did more than survive. I thrived. And when their dream home went into foreclosure, guess who showed up with the winning bid? If you were in my shoes, abandoned, erased, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments, what would you have said when they finally looked you in the eye? I thought maybe this trip would fix something, that it was their way of trying, of remembering they still had a daughter worth bringing along. They said Santorini was a fresh start, a clean break from all the tension back home. It was just the three of us. No work calls, no siblings, no distractions. When they surprised me with the tickets, I didn't even ask why. I wanted so badly to believe it was real. The plane ride was long, and we barely spoke. Dad read his newspaper the whole flight without flipping a single page. Mom dozed with her lips slightly parted, the faint shimmer of coral lipstick still fresh. She only wore that shade on days she wanted to be remembered. Santorini in the summer was as bright as the travel blogs promised. Blinding white buildings, blue domes that looked painted into the sky, tourists weaving between souvenir shops and narrow stone paths. Our hotel room smelled like old roses and salt air, the wallpaper peeling just slightly in the corners. But we had a balcony, and the ocean was right there. The first 2 days were awkward. Forced smiles, photos in front of ruins I didn't care about. Gelato that melted too fast. My mom kept posting filtered pictures online with captions like, "Family first, always." My dad never looked at the camera. I tried to pretend. I held onto my plastic spoon like it was an anchor and laughed at jokes that didn't land. There were moments, tiny, almost forgettable, when Mom reached for my hand in line, when Dad gave me his last bite of lemon tart. I tucked those away like treasures. On our last morning, we had breakfast together at the hotel buffet. The eggs were rubbery, the coffee burned. My dad sat silently, sipping black coffee and glancing at his watch. My mom chatted about souvenir shops nearby, casually reapplying that same coral lipstick. "We're just going down the street to pick something up," she said, dabbing at her lips with a tissue. "Be back in 15. I barely looked up, scrolling through messages from a friend back home. I waved them off, nodded, pretended not to care. But inside, I hoped maybe they'd come back with a silly bracelet or a magnet with my name on it, something that meant they'd thought of me. 15 minutes passed, then an hour, then 4. The front desk clerk frowned when I asked if she'd seen them. "The couple from 214, she said. "They checked out this morning." My stomach dropped. I ran to the room, but my key card didn't work anymore. I pounded on the door until someone from housekeeping opened it. The room was clean, too clean. My suitcase was gone, my backpack, even the tiny notebook I kept under the pillow. It was like I'd never been there at all. I stood frozen in the hallway until my legs gave out. Calls to their phones went straight to voicemail. Texts didn't deliver. I remember staring at the cracked tile floor, trying to piece together something that made sense. Anything. Back in the lobby, I sat on a bench near the elevator, my fingers dug into my jacket pockets out of instinct. That's when I felt the folded paper, plain, stiff. My mother's handwriting, one line. "You're 16 now, old enough to survive." I don't remember how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to shift and cast shadows across the marble floor, long enough for the hope to curdle into something else. That evening, I walked toward the cliffs where the island kissed the sea. The breeze carried music from a wedding reception nearby. Laughter, glasses clinking, people who still loved each other, and me standing alone, whispering to the wind, "They planned this." My first bed after they left me was a flat patch of stone tucked behind a bakery. I curled up against a warm metal trash bin, too tired to cry at first. The stars overhead blinked like in different eyes. I wrapped my jacket tight, still carrying that note in the pocket. Even after a week, it smelled like the inside of an airport, sterile and far from home. The bakery came alive before sunrise. I'd watch through slits between crates as deliveries arrived, men shouting in Greek, glass bottles clinking, bags of flour thudding to the ground. On the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. Hunger is louder than shame. There was a tray left cooling by the back door, full of round rolls with golden crusts. I waited until no one was near, then reached out and grabbed one. I didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. A hand closed around my wrist, not rough, not gentle either. I looked up into the face of a woman whose apron was dusted in flour and whose silver hair was pulled back like she hadn't bothered with mirrors in years. Her eyes studied me, not unkind, but sharp enough to cut through lies. "If you're hungry," she said, "you work." That was all. I followed her inside, trailing flour with every step. The kitchen was tight and hot, filled with the hum of ovens and the clatter of trays. She handed me a mop and pointed at a puddle near the sink. I scrubbed in silence. My knees ached. My fingers stung. But she didn't throw me out. By the end of the day, she led me to a tiny cot in a storage room. No blanket, no pillow. Just a folded towel and a bottle of water on the floor. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer comfort, but she didn't make me leave. Her name was Lucia. I learned it 2 days later when a customer shouted it from the front counter, and she responded without looking up. She didn't speak to me much, but she let me stay. Each night there was a loaf wrapped in brown paper waiting beside the cot, never addressed, always fresh. I started watching her hands when she kneaded dough, how her palms pressed and pulled, how her fingers danced with the flour like it was second nature. She adjusted the oven without using the dial, relying on instinct and scent. She barely needed words. Once late at night, we were the last ones in the kitchen. She was shaping loaves, and I was wiping counters. Her voice came out quiet like it had wandered in from another room. "My daughter's hands were always covered in flour, too," she said. Then nothing more. I didn't ask, and she didn't explain. But something shifted in that silence. She saw me, not just the dirt under my nails or the empty look in my eyes, but something worth saving. A few mornings later, after the last delivery truck rumbled off, I walked out to toss a torn bag of flour into the bin. There it was, wedged behind broken crates, half covered in dust, a cracked laptop, screen still faintly glowing. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. The power light flickered. It still worked. I learned algebra beside a humming fridge and a sack of sesame seeds that always leaked at the corner. The storage room wasn't much, just a table with uneven legs and a flickering ceiling bulb, but it became my classroom. That cracked laptop, the one I found behind the dumpster, took 3 days and some wire stripped from an old radio before it powered on without dying. Lucia never asked what I was doing crouched over it after hours. She saw the extension cord running across the tile, the pages torn from donated textbooks, the way I whispered numbers to myself like a prayer. She just left the door cracked open and replaced the burnt bulb without a word. I signed up for GED prep through a free online program. The Wi-Fi from the cafe next door was barely strong enough to load video, but I made it work. I studied fractions while the ovens preheated, reviewed history dates with cinnamon in the air. Each time I passed a quiz, I'd close my eyes and repeat the score like it meant more than it did. Because to me, it did. One afternoon, a man named Yanis left behind a copy of a Greek business journal on the counter. I almost tossed it with the napkins and receipts, but something in the bolded headline caught my eye. An article about a struggling shipping company restructuring after a leadership shakeup. I didn't know why it stuck with me, but I took it home, read it twice, and started searching everything I could about stocks. I had €200 tucked away. It was meant for shoes and maybe a coat. But instead, I followed a gut feeling I couldn't explain and bought shares in that company through a basic trading app. 3 weeks later, the value tripled. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. But that night, I bought Lucia a new cell phone and left it on the kitchen counter in a plain box with a sticky note. Old one was too slow. She picked it up, turned it over, then looked at me. "You playing accountant now?" she said with half a smile. "Just curious," I replied, pretending not to care. The truth was, I couldn't stop. I devoured YouTube lectures on finance, read forums in 2 languages, and even found a PDF of Warren Buffett's early letters. I scribbled notes on the backs of flour orders, memorized terminology while scrubbing pans, and wrote out formulas in the steam on the kitchen window. Lucia never interrupted, but sometimes she'd leave articles by the espresso machine, circled in red pen. She never said where they came from. One evening, while wiping down the counters, I saw a newspaper on the table. Lucia didn't look up from her coffee. She just slid the page toward me with one finger. My heart stuttered. There it was, my parents' address. Bold font. Foreclosure notice. The numbers in the zip code hadn't changed. The photo showed the same cracked mailbox I'd once leaned against, waiting for the school bus. Lucia sipped her coffee, then asked softly, "You recognize that address?" The Florida heat wrapped around me like a warning. The sun pressed against my blazer and sweat collected at the small of my back, but I didn't move. I stood still, watching retirees fan themselves with auction brochures and younger men in pastel polos scroll through property listings on their tablets. I blended in. I looked like I belonged. Tidy hair, neutral clothes, sunglasses that hid more than just my eyes. Lucia stood beside me in a wide-brimmed hat and linen blouse, holding the bidder's card. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The paper in my purse said I was someone else now. My legal name hadn't changed, but the LLC I'd built from scratch, the consulting brand that had helped small vendors grow online, was the name listed on the registration sheet. The auctioneer called out the first address. I held my breath. It felt strange, hearing it out loud again. That street had once been the soundtrack of my childhood. Bike tires skimming sidewalks, sprinklers ticking in the afternoon, wind chimes on every porch. And now it was just a lot number. Bidding started low. A man in khakis and boat shoes raised his card. Lucia didn't move. I waited. He raised again. A woman behind us murmured something about potential rentals. I leaned slightly toward Lucia. Now. She lifted the card, motion steady. No hesitation. The auctioneer nodded. Bidding climbed in measured steps. The man in khakis looked over his shoulder, then at us. He squinted, sizing us up, unsure why 2 women, one older, one unreadable, were even here. He raised again. I didn't flinch. Lucia did as I instructed. Card up, eyes forward. The numbers rose faster, then slowed. A long pause. The man hesitated, scratched his temple, lowered his card. "Sold to bidder 173, the auctioneer announced. The gavel struck the wooden block with a hollow clap. It echoed in my chest like something final. Lucia turned her head slightly toward me. Her voice was low, almost gentle. "It's yours now." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I nodded once and stepped forward to sign the paperwork. The clerk handed me the folder without a word. I scrawled the signature, my business name, in careful print, like I'd done it 100 times before. No ceremony, no champagne, just ink on paper. We walked back to the rental car in silence. The AC sputtered for a full minute before cooling the air. I rested my head back against the seat and stared at the ceiling. Lucia didn't ask how I felt. She didn't offer platitudes or jokes. She simply adjusted the rearview mirror and pulled out of the parking lot like we'd just picked up dry cleaning. It was done. I owned the house. The walls that once echoed with slammed doors and tight-lipped dinners. The bathroom with the cracked tile they never fixed. The front steps where I waited for rides that never came. And yet, all I felt was stillness. Not triumph, not release. Just a strange, heavy quiet that settled behind my ribs like wet cloth. Later that night, while reviewing scanned documents and emailing the title company, my phone buzzed. New voicemail. I played it on speaker. A man's voice. Measured, polite, forced. "Hello, this is regarding the recent property acquisition on Ridgeway Drive. The former owners, Karen and Mark Thompson, would like to request a meeting with the new owner to discuss possible arrangements. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Lucia, drying mugs at the sink, didn't look over, but she said evenly, "Well, that didn't take long." They walked into the room like they were the ones being wronged. My mother in a beige cardigan, oversized sunglasses, and hair pulled into a loose knot that framed her face just so. Calculated, controlled. My father followed behind, holding a folder close to his chest, like it might shield him from what was coming. They didn't recognize me at first. That was the part I hadn't anticipated. I sat on the other side of the conference table in a navy suit, hair tucked neatly behind my ears, my name nowhere on the paperwork in front of them. I was just the buyer until I wasn't. I took off my sunglasses slowly. Karen froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. Mark blinked twice, his gaze dropping almost immediately. The silence was so sharp it might have drawn blood. "Hi," I said. Karen inhaled like she'd been underwater and just broken the surface. "Maya." My name sounded foreign coming from her mouth. We didn't know," she said. Her voice wavered, but not from emotion, from performance. "We thought you'd hate us less if we just disappeared." I looked at her, not blinking. "You didn't disappear. You erased me." She swallowed hard. "We were drowning. You were hard, always dramatic, always fighting." I nodded once. "You were supposed to be the lifeboat, not the ones who throw people overboard." Mark shifted in his seat. He still hadn't looked at me. "Say something," I said to him. "Say it wasn't your choice." His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, "I didn't think you'd survive." There it was. The truth, too small, too late. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. Inside was the deed, signed and filed. Their address, now under my company's name. Karen didn't touch it. Her hands hovered over the edge like the paper might burn her. Lucia stepped into the room just then, clipboard in hand. She gave them a nod, not unkind, but unreadable. "We'll need the keys within 30 days, she said. Karen looked between us, her voice catching. "You can't do this. We're your parents." I met her eyes. You were my parents, and you made your choice. She crumbled, like tissue pulled from a wet pocket. But I didn't move. I had given them too much already. My youth, my trust, my silence. There was nothing left to offer. Lucia placed a small envelope on the table. "Here are the legal instructions," she said, her tone as neutral as her blouse. "We suggest you read them carefully." Mark looked at me for the first time. Really looked. But I wasn't that girl on the ferry anymore, holding on to hope like it was candy in my pocket. I stood up, collected my bag, pushed the chair back in gently. Karen's voice cracked. "Why now?" I paused at the doorway. Light filtered through the blinds, cutting across the room like quiet judgment. "Because I didn't need you to come back," I said. "I needed you to know I did." And then I left. We painted the walls a soft yellow, not bright, not bold, just warm enough to feel like sunrise. The house didn't look anything like it used to. We stripped the wallpaper, tore down the old curtain rods, and replaced the cracked tile in the kitchen with smooth oak laminate. It wasn't easy. The labor was slow, deliberate. But that was the point. Lucia handled the layout. I handled the permits. She picked the paint. I ordered the bunk beds. Together, we made a space that breathed. Not a shelter, not a halfway house, just a place where a girl could sleep without flinching at footsteps in the hallway. We called it Second Door. Lucia said the name came to her in the middle of the night. Some people never get to walk through the first one, she told me over tea one morning. So we build them another. The room smelled like lavender and lemon soap. Each bed had a folded blanket, 2 pillows, and a lockbox for personal things. The living room had mismatched chairs, shelves filled with books, and a record player someone donated that only worked when you held the knob a certain way. The first week, 6 girls arrived, all between 14 and 17, all with different stories they weren't ready to tell. 2 of them didn't speak. One barely made eye contact. Another flinched when I offered her a second helping of toast. On Wednesday, Lucia held her first baking class in the remodeled kitchen. The counters were lined with flour, bowls of cinnamon, and chipped measuring cups we'd found at a thrift store. I stayed in the background, wiping spills, handing out spoons. That night, as we handed out clean laundry, Rosa, one of the newest girls, took the socks from the basket, stared at them, then sat down slowly and began to cry. Not loud, not desperate, just a quiet, collapsing kind of cry that comes from being given something gentle when you expect the opposite. Lucia didn't rush to comfort her. She simply nodded and said, "Let them breathe." The rest comes later. It took everything in me not to cry too. Later, after everyone had settled, I stepped outside. The porch light cast a golden glow on the steps. Someone was playing music from a cracked phone speaker inside. Soft laughter drifted out through the screen door. Real laughter. Unguarded. Unpracticed. Lucia joined me with 2 mugs of tea. She passed me one and leaned on the railing beside me. "Still feel like you don't have a home?" she asked. I looked through the window. One girl was braiding another's hair on the couch. Another sat cross-legged, scribbling something in a journal. In the hallway mirror, someone was brushing her teeth while humming. It was ordinary, and it was everything. "No," I said, "not anymore." We stood there for a while, listening to the sound of life happening in a place that once held silence like a weapon. I took a deep breath. It felt like the first one I'd taken in years. That night on the porch, with cinnamon still lingering in the air and laughter slipping through the windows, I realized healing doesn't always roar. It sometimes hums softly, like a home finally breathing right. Sometimes the greatest power isn't found in payback, but in creating space where others can feel safe enough to begin again. We can't change the hurt behind us, but we can choose to build something better in front of us. If this story reminded you of the quiet strength and kindness, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What door has life opened for you, or helped you open for someone else?